Good morning. We have an awesome show for you today, a special show on The Organized, coming to you this morning at 9 a.m. on Nakamoto Wednesday. And we're going to host a panel on BNS, what's going on with BNS. And I have a tremendous lineup of awesome guys in here. I have to introduce Larry Salibri first because he had fireworks behind him. Larry, what's going on?
It's exciting. Nakamoto is here, so we have to celebrate with fireworks.
That's right. That's right. I thought you were just celebrating the show.
No, that too.
Awesome. We got HeroGamer. We got Set Zeus. We got Set Pato. We got Dan Trevino. We got Marvin Janssen. And of course, we got the I don't know if this is his first time docs. It's the first time he's shown his face on our show, Haddy BTC, my awesome co-host. And thank you, sir. Thank you all for coming. We need to discuss this. We need to have this conversation for the community. I know there's a lot of discussion going on in various back channels and communications groups and on GitHub and like talking about in the SIP process, but it's not touching the general community. And there's a lot of things we can do with the BNS and .btc names, and it's just kind of not functional right now. And I think you guys all can help us talk about where it's going, what we can expect with the V2 from trust machines, and what the other options are for, if anything, with V1 that's being left. So let me go a little bit more into detail into introducing everybody. Larry has his new Internet Labs project that he's working on. They're definitely working on stuff for BNS as well. Dan is working on Boom Wallet, and that's an awesome project that's being built. Marvin's participating with ryder.id is something coming new. I'm on the wait list for that. I'm excited to see. Really cool stuff. And then Set Pato and Set Zeus. These guys came in late, and I know that they've been doing some tremendous stuff in the space, but I'm less familiar. I know they represent trust machines and what's being built on V2, but I'm not sure exactly all of the back end of that. And of course, HeroGamer, who's just everywhere in the space. He's the Stacks Foundation resident, SIP resident, and just runs the DE grants program and kind of just runs around supporting everybody all the time. I'm not sure if he actually sleeps. Maybe he's a robot. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you all for coming, and hello.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Hey, guys. Good morning.
So I'm not sure. So, Larry, since I did start with you with the fireworks, and I see you're sipping your coffee, so it's obviously an inconvenient time to pick you, but tell us
soda water.
Give us a little bit of a background on your perspective on BNS and where it is right now.
So for those of you who don't know, like Stacks came out of a project called One Name, which launched, was created in the end of 2013 and launched in the beginning of 2014. And at that point, it was basically an identity system that was built on top of a chain called Namecoin, and Namecoin was the first altcoin. It was something that Satoshi imagined, and basically Bitcoin was forked, and Satoshi thought, hey, we could also use this technology for making a DNS-like system that doesn't have a central point of trust. So that system was created, and then Manib and his co-founder Ryan created this identity system on top of Namecoin. It was very nice. There was a website you could easily register. You get a Bitcoin wallet that was attached to your identity. Those names were .id. So a lot of people who have been around a long time have .id names. And then over the years, that project turned into, it was renamed to Blockstack, which is the shirt that I'm wearing right now. And then the block was cut off and it became Stacks. And so the system was migrated from Namecoin to the Bitcoin blockchain when we discovered that that it's really important to secure your system with the most secure blockchain, which was Bitcoin back in like 2016 when this happened, and it's still Bitcoin today in 2024. And then fast forward, I think in 2017 there was like a Bitcoin fee price run up. I think it went up to I don't remember what the fees were, but we were registering names directly on Bitcoin L1, and it was getting to the point where it would cost something like $80 worth of Bitcoin to register a name that costs like $2. So like the fees were like multiple times the cost of actually registering the name. And that was when we really said, hey, like it really makes sense to make a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin to like do other stuff, whether it be register names or smart contracts. And that was the origin of what today is Stacks. And yeah, so like when Stacks 1.0 launched a couple of years ago, the current BNS smart contract was launched along with that sort of Genesis block. It's like sort of built into the nodes. It's like the canonical BNS. And so we started calling that BNS V1, even though it's really like V3 probably or something like that if you really come from the beginning. And then so that contract was a work that was done very quickly by one core developer, sort of without any community input and without being audited. And so we found out like once that launched, there were actually a bunch of problems with it. Like one of the problems is that like when you renew like your name, you don't actually pay the renewal fee. There's some other problems with it. Like you can only have one name per account, which was actually a regression because we used to be able to have multiple names per account, like starting in end of 2013 all the way up to 2021. And then suddenly we could only have one name per account. So for the past like basically since launch, there's been there was a period of time where there's a lot of activity, and that's where .btc came out. And Marvin, who is here, worked on the .btc project. I forget if it was at Stacks Foundations or Trust Machines or Hero, one of the organizations. But he's sort of like the person that wrote the code and like wrote the contract, like wrote the front end website. And then that was really huge, like as we can just tell by looking at X, because there are all these people that have .btc names in their profile. So it's really, really caught on with people in terms of identity. So basically since that time, there's been a question, like how do we move BNS forward? And so I started, I guess, I don't know when it was, probably like a year and a half ago, started like a Bitcoin BNS working group, a group of people that would meet like every other week. And sometimes like it changed who was there. We often had like Mark from Leather, and like sometimes we had Ken from Experts. We had Nick from Gamma, like Hank from Mechanism was very involved, who's now working at Trust Machines. And over that period of time, we came up with a list of, I would say 6, 7, 8 sort of points that like everybody was basically agreed on that if we had a BNS version 2, we would like to do these things. And one of them, of course, is to fix the bugs like the burning the fees, and to do some other things. And the beginning of, I guess end of last year, beginning of this year, like, but there's always a question of like who's doing this work. And so originally Hank sort of volunteered to like take a stab at like writing some smart contracts. And then he sort of like disappeared. And then apparently like quit Mechanism and moved to Trust Machines. And then really Trust Machines, like he moved to work on the core blockchain, but Trust Machines picked up the ball through their Orange domain unit and said like, okay, like we need someone to write, like to take these specifications and turn it into an actual product so the community can use it. And they were very awesome to do that, like to put up the money, to bring on some of the people that we have in this call to write like a BNS version 2.0. So that's really great. And that's sort of where we are today. And then we have like some ideas of how that could go in the future after version 2.0, which came out of sort of Marvin's experience, and we can talk about later. Does that sort of give you a good overview?
Yeah, I think that was a great overview. It kind of crossed over where it all came from. So I didn't realize that Stacks had actually evolved specifically out of Namecoin direct, like completely like that. But I had a general understanding of that history, and yeah, I think that's there's a lot that can be done with this, right? I mean, that's it ID and on-chain ID and on-chain how to use that on-chain name is really almost like fundamental to having adoption. You know, it's part of what's going to make it easy and safe for people, for the regular user. So for sure. So you guys all know better than me. So does anyone want to add to that, or is there anything that anyone thinks should be that people should know more about regarding the history of BNS and where?
Maybe I can add a little bit of color on BNS when we transitioned to .btc, since Larry gave such a great overview of the history and how old actually this name system is and how it has evolved over time. There's two interesting tidbits to me. So I also remember I joined during the Blockstack era, and I registered my names, and I remember that Blockstack at the time, they were giving out free names. So you could get a .id.blockstack name, and I remember getting one of those. But then they also had .id, and I think that was the first real namespace that was then transitioned over also to BNS when Stacks 2 launched. And Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that when it was still Stacks 1 and we were like on Bitcoin, that the .id namespace registration on Bitcoin burned 40 Bitcoin, right? Was that 40 Bitcoin?
It was something, I think maybe it was 4044 or something like that. But there's a famous picture of Jude sitting in their like Lower East Side office, I think Manib and Ryan are looking at him, and he's like about to broadcast the transaction to burn the 40 plus Bitcoin to register the ID namespace.
Yeah, so that I think that's very cool, and that gives ID such a history. And I remember getting Marvin.id early then. And since Larry also brought up .btc, I think it's worth highlighting just what interest there was when Stacks 2 launched. People were very hyped about names becoming a lot more useful, right? So going from what existed on Stacks 1 in terms of names and then going to Stacks 2, so many extra features were added. Suddenly you had a full token that you could trade. Basically, right, a whole new chain was being launched. And we created .btc, I think, as the first or one of the first apps on top of that new BNS. And we thought, like, okay, how popular is this going to be, right? We saw how people were registering names on Stacks 1. And we estimated that we were going to get 3 registrations per minute for .btc names. But in fact, when we launched, it was 3 names per second. So the system couldn't even handle it. We had a backend and we had to scale it up super fast. And we just completely did not expect that it would be so popular. So it was constantly stuck, constantly congested, and we were scaling up. We were adding more backend processors, because what we wanted to offer to people to make it as easy as possible is you could buy a name with Stacks, but we also wanted you to be able to buy a .btc name with Bitcoin or even with fiat currency. So we had a backend system running for that would then purchase the name using Stacks and transfer it over to you. And this was all hooked up through a fiat payment processor. And those systems are constantly congested because we were seeing 3 names purchases per minute, which was absolutely wild for us. So just to illustrate how excited people were about using names in the beginning. And this has tapered off. Sometimes it's recessed more to the background, and then there's another wave of interest in BNS. So we've seen this happen. And I think part of that is also like, the BNS that launched with Stacks 2 was very useful and very cool, but it still had some limitations and some properties, as Larry mentioned, that made it harder to use. So trading names was hard, and that's something that's popular and that people do. Owning multiple names was impossible. We saw different projects. I think this was also Hank. They launched BNSX to wrap these names in specific smart contracts so that you could own multiple names. But that made name resolution very hard, and you couldn't talk to a single contract to really figure that out, I believe. So a lot has happened, and BNS has really evolved over time. We've seen better tooling to use BNS, but also the contract itself, or I should say even before BNS was a contract, it has gone through many different stages.
Yeah, it's very great info. And so the first thing that you said that's kind of stuck in my mind is that it was 44 Bitcoins to register a .id name when it first came out.
That's the namespace. So the namespace itself. So namespace have to be very valuable. And so if you register .id, because that's 2 characters. I believe that was 40 or 44 Bitcoins back then on the Bitcoin main chain.
So it's the handle, the namespace, the just being able to sell .IDs.
That's right.
You control the domain, I guess, or something, right?
That's right.
That's still 44 Bitcoins, a lot of money. It's not, obviously it wasn't as much money then as it is now, but and that the economics of Bitcoin is obvious in a situation like that, where you spent 44 Bitcoin on something 10 years ago, and it's maybe not worth 44 Bitcoin now because Bitcoin's worth way more.
Well, the interesting thing is actually nobody controls it. So like instead of somebody has to pay 44 Bitcoin to register the domain, register the top level domain, so people can register it by names, but that person gets nothing for their 44 Bitcoin. Like they don't in the current system or the previous system.
They
don't
control it. Is available.
They get the opportunity to register the first domains.
They can import names on it, and so they paid the when they moved from Namecoin, they paid the 44 Bitcoin or 40 Bitcoin, and then imported all the names that were on Namecoin into that namespace. But the talk was
you're not an owner. Nobody owns a namespace. So beyond that import, you don't really get anything for it. And I guess the idea would be namespace valuable. You crowdfund the Bitcoin to launch a namespace.
It's for the love of the tech at that point, right?
Well, it's really a cultural set of norms. So the reason it was done like that is because the system was created so that other people, anybody with enough resources, could create their own namespace, and you wanted it to be valuable. But even though we created the rules, it's important that we play by our own rules. And so that was what Manib and Ryan and Jude were thinking. They were thinking we made the rules so that if you register a 2-character namespace in BNS, it's going to cost this much money. And if we set precedent by saying, well, it's that much money for everybody except for us, that's not a good culture to create, right?
Right. No, it seems like a moral and ethical way to build, for sure. But it's a staggering number for something like that now, because so are there other 2-character namespaces that anyone ever that you guys know of?
I know a few with 3 characters, but I don't think they were from that era. So we have .btc, which launched together with Stacks 2. We also have .stx, which I think launched after that. Larry, I don't believe there's another 2-letter namespace before.
I haven't
we
seen
had .blockstack, but I don't know what happened to that.
Very cool. So this is just a general user experience, right? I'm not the super techie guy. I do have a couple of .btc names in different wallets. My main one, PeaceLoveMusic.btc, is the primary wallet I use. And in conjunction with doing the deorganized media, broadcasting and hosting Twitter Spaces or X Spaces, I have a really hard time calling it X. I'm sure there's other people holding X Spaces. I'm trying to write some articles to help cover some of the people building in the space as well. And I'd love to do that on the Siegel app, but it doesn't recognize my .btc name as being set up properly. The zone file, I can go to btc.us and redo it. The transactions process, but the zone file is still not set up properly. I'm following the directions on Siegel app. It just won't work. And then I'm also trying to register a new .btc name now on btc.us. I've tried on .so. I've tried, and the transactions just keep failing, and I don't know why. I'm not sure if it's a problem with BNS or I've tried multiple wallets, and this is the user experience that people are having. And onboarding users, one of the first things that they can do, it's cheap. It's 2 stacks. You can set up your name. You're making it personal. You're identifying with using the space. And instead of having a good experience for new people, they're having a bad experience, a frustrating experience. So what do we do about that? What are we doing about that? anybody.
Yeah. Okay. So regarding the zone files, we are currently working on the VNS v2 version. So we are looking into zone files thoroughly to have a better user experience, to avoid having resolution conflicts or anything like that. So yeah, recently Setsus and I have come up with a new solution that I think is pretty exciting because it gives a lot of flexibility into the ecosystem and is just having a resolver contract, right? So we have the VNS v2 that has a lot of great updates, managed namespaces, unmanaged namespaces. Now the BNS v2 names are NFTs, which makes them more easy to trade, to sell, to do whatever you want with them. And that allows also for multiple names per address, right? So regarding the zone files, we have come up with the solution to create a resolver contract where we can do two things with the zone file. One, we can inscribe directly or we can store directly the zone file information in the smart contracts as long as it's not longer than 4,096 bytes. So yeah, we set up a front end so that people can come in and just say, okay, this will be the stacks address linked to this name, the Bitcoin address, the X handle, Discord handle, whatever we want to add to those zone files. And if it's not longer than 4,096 bytes, it will be inscribed. It will be stored directly in the smart contract, right? So we will have a function to resolve that zone file, and we can just have the information. We just have to decode the information and display it to the user or resolve it in whatever way we think is best. The other solution is, well, it's like a hybrid approach, because if someone has a lot of in their zone file and just has more than 4,096 bytes, they will be able to store directly in the contract an IPFS CID. So if someone has a lot more information in their zone file, they can just go set up a JSON file on IPFS and share that and make that contract call into the resolver contract and store that CID directly in the zone file, right? So when we fetch that information, if we know that the length of the zone file is 34 bytes, then we know it's an IPFS CID, and we have to resolve it in a different way that we would resolve the smart contract one. So yeah, we have already put this to the test. It works perfectly. I think it's a really clean solution, and it's just a matter of defining a format for the JSON file to which information we will be supporting, which information we will be able to store and be able to get. So I think it's a pretty flexible solution that will allow for different use cases. And if someone comes up with a different use case for the zone files, as long as we can store it in 4,096 bytes or in IPFS, we will be able to implement that zone file solution.
Okay, and I think I understand. I'm not sure of all exactly why that works or exactly the functionality of that, but I do think I understand that there's a solution here for the problem that we're having now with V2. And as far as V2 goes, do I have to do anything with my .btc name now? Is that changing? Do I have to? I understand that V1 and V2 are both going to coexist. And is that going to cause, does the end user have to know anything about that?
No, the migration will be handled directly by us. So we will be in charge of grabbing all 300,000 plus names that are already on BNS V1, and we will migrate them to BNS V2. We will airdrop those names directly into their current owners. So if you own a BNS V1 name, you will get the same or the equivalent BNS V2 name directly airdrop into that address.
Okay, cool. So that and that's going to be an NFT, and they can transfer that between wallets. Is there a registration? Are they going to be able to register for V2 via the current websites that they register new names now?
Yeah, I think I'm not familiar with that, but I think that applications will need to have like a V2 way to register the names. So yeah, they should be upgrading that part to be able to register directly into VNS V2.
But we are gonna, if necessary, we are working on we have a testnet site that I was just realizing now there's no way to share a link, but we do have a testnet site for BNS V2 that is going to have a lot of just very basic namespace and name management functions just on the website in case,
you can share the link. There's a private chat at the bottom that you can share a link into, and I can put it up, or you could also share your screen. If you brought it up, if you have it up on a screen, you could share your screen if you wanted to do that. But you said there is a website that's going to be a specific space to register for V2. So is that going to be backwards compatible when you register a V2 name? Is it going to create a V1.btc? No. So there really won't be. So moving forward, how about this? If I set up a new .btc on V1, will that also work on V2 going forward? So that's why I can't set up new names now. Is that why that's not functioning?
So I think it's important to realize that there can be infinite name systems on stacks, right? So anybody can create. You could literally just take the current BNS contract, copy, paste it, redeploy it, and then that would be a separate name system. So what we're talking about, BNS V1 and V2, it's ultimately what people use and what people think is the canonical name contract. So from a user perspective, it depends on how you use BNS, right? If all of the apps you use decide that they're only going to pay attention to BNS V2, then it really won't matter what's in BNS V1 because you'll have no way to see it, right? Or you'll have no easy way to use it. So that it's really it comes as an outcome of social behavior. So it's sort of like Bitcoin, right? There's Bitcoin and then there's Bitcoin Cash, but Bitcoin Cash could have been Bitcoin if everybody just called it Bitcoin instead of calling it Bitcoin Cash and then just started using it. So it's just, you're really it's confusing from a user perspective because it's not like iOS where only Apple can decide what version of iOS is there. When they put a new version, then the old one doesn't exist anymore. It's not like that with basically any smart contract.
Okay, so V1 won't go away because it's not really being overwritten, but it's going to probably go away from functional purposes because why would anyone build on that if there's a better version 2 that actually works with everyone's former BTC names? And then also, if I register a new name on V2, it's not going to work on V1. And if I register a new name on V1, why would I do that? Am I even going to be able to do that? It won't automatically be on V2. So V1 is going to stop being supported, and it's just going to be V2 going forward, likely, right? I mean, that's what it seems like to me.
Yep. Yeah, the way you can see
answer
it
something.
Okay, no, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to answer, you did mention that right now, if you wanted to register your BNS V1, it still would be migrated over to BNS V2. So I definitely clarify that.
Do you know when is the cutoff for that, or when are you looking to launch that?
So we don't have a cutoff of an exact block height yet, but we were waiting on Nakamoto to finally launch. So it is really cool that we're having this talk today.
Yep, happy Nakamoto.
Yeah, our goal now is end of September, first week of October, to try to deploy BNS V2 and kick off the migration process, which will take a couple of days because, as we're saying, no one will have to do anything, and they're just going to be airdropped exactly what they have on V1 at the moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to add here that in the end, like these naming systems, as Larry mentioned, you can have a theoretical infinite amount, or almost infinite amount of different name systems on a chain, and your first access point to these is usually the wallet that you use. So let's say that you use Lather. If Lather uses BNS v2, the trust machine's BNS, then that's the one that you'll deal with. And if you try to enter a v1 name and Lather doesn't look at v1, then you won't find those names. So it's really about that. And then unless you're a developer and you know where to find that, whatever your wallet is using or dictates, that's the name system that you will use. So it's then up to these vendors to either use that name system and they'll be free to choose that, right? So Lather could say, oh, we really like v2. We're going to announce to our users that we're going to be switching at some point and give them a heads up on what that's going to look like. And as an end user, you might not notice the difference because v2 is going to replicate all the v1 names anyway. And then it continues as normal.
So the v2 is going to replicate the v1 names one time. If those v1 names change, though, you're screwed.
Yeah. So this is like actually the same state as both Bitcoin and like legacy DNS. So like if there's a Bitcoin fork, like Bitcoin forks into Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, like you get like, and you have one Bitcoin, you get one Bitcoin on both chains. If you do something with it and lose it or sell it, you don't get like that Bitcoin back, right? You have it once, like, so that state doesn't merge back. So that's the same as Bitcoin, but also like the current, like widely used ICANN domain name system, right? Like Microsoft.com, Google.com, like you could create your own DNS system. Like right now, all you have to do is like install a little bit of software, change the settings on your computer to point to like your own server instead of like your ISP or instead of Cloudflare, and you could own Microsoft.com, right? And you could like put whatever you want there, but the problem is no one else will see it. So it's ultimately like, it's a network effect, it's a social effect. If everybody's using one particular contract, like, and then like they expect like you to find like Marvin, and then like you like run your own contract and you like buy Marvin yourself, and people don't find what they like, you're the only one that can look at it. So like does it matter?
Yeah, and these names migrate all the time, right? If you look at Stacks 1, there are names there that maybe still exist on Bitcoin somehow, but that indexer, if it's still alive, nobody's using it. That went offline, and these.
But everybody's still looking at the same indexer. I think what's confusing to me is that I think we're telling users that, hey, you can use whatever you want, but in reality, it's up to the developers to choose what they want. And so I cannot, I mean, as a user, if I want to stick with V1, but all the apps are using V2, then I'm out of luck. My name's not going to get resolved properly, right? Potentially. If it's up to the developers, that's fine, but it's fine to me as a developer, but the users really don't get a choice there. And if we do give them a choice, my concern is that we get things out of sync. There's no single source of truth. And as a developer, I no longer have a way to reliably resolve a name. I mean, if we're just leaving it open to everyone to kind of work itself out over time, there's going to be a period of time where, like, do I use Marvin for V1? You let yours expire, and now I'm trying to send something to Marvin .btc, but Marvin.btc was already purchased by somebody else now. I don't know if you've chosen V1 or V2, Marvin, as a user with your choice. I might tell you I'm always going to resolve to V2 or V1, but you don't, as a user, you might not be even using my app. So, I mean, to me, there's a lot of gray area here about how we can reliably resolve names over time to any particular chain. Like I might choose to use V2, but Marvin might choose to stay on V1.
The world is a chaotic place.
So,
well, I mean,
especially with Marvin in it, you never know what will happen.
Is there any like how does this happen in
any good? If we've got like 3 sets of things that as a developer, when you're trying to figure out, do I check here? Do I check here? Like, what are they using? BNS is effectively useless now.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I don't mean to make light of it, but there's nothing we can do, right? There's literally no way to solve the problem. That's just a nature, like unless like we create an army and we go around and say like, if you don't use this contract, you will die, right? There's literally no way that we can. And then even then we have to be very good at like having very large coverage of our army.
I think there's things we can. Sorry to interrupt, Larry. I think there's things that we can do, like making sure that the APIs that are used by 99% of the people resolve to the correct or to a chosen contract. If somebody wants to go out and stand up their own API server and still resolve BNS, B3 or something like that, good on them. But the reality is, like in our world, the hero node is what everybody uses. And if those are working for the right contract, then we can kind of effectively settle on a standard.
Yeah, those will resolve to V2 if that's like the overall question. But I am curious from a technical perspective, is there even a way, like I haven't thought long enough to be like, hey, this is impossible, there's no way of doing it. Is there even a way of like tying those across different versions? When we did update from Namecoin to BNS V1, did that happen? I don't imagine so, right?
It was just a social thing. So I mean, at the time there was one major app, a couple apps, and then like they just said like, we're gonna point the app at this new thing that we wrote. Right. And it's all, I mean, I think there are two outcomes. One is that like no one uses it, right? In which case it doesn't matter. Or like people use it and then very quickly you start to see network effect around something. And everybody's like, well, like these two apps use this one, so I'm going to use that one because most people use that one. That's the best. And then like now 3 apps do it and 4 apps do it. And you quickly get a network effect. So I think that I mean, right now where we are with BNS, it's actually probably, if you could come up with a use case, like a really good use case for BNS, like which we don't really have at the moment, but like if you could come in and say like, oh wow, there's this really new cool thing everybody wants and you have to use BNS, like you would have total control to like fork the contract and point it somewhere else. It's very much like the whole economic actors determine what the canonical Bitcoin fork is. Like if you have a lot of users in your app or like or your software, then you have a lot of power to determine which is the Bitcoin, the BNS contract people follow. And we've seen this like, I don't know if people watching know Jabber, XMPP, like the chat protocol. It was like popular about 10, 15 years ago. And it was sort of like the first wave of instant messaging. People were like, hey, this is stupid. We have like AIM and MSN. We should make a protocol so everybody can talk together. So this protocol was made, and then like Facebook adopted it, Google adopted it for Google Talk, Facebook had it for Facebook Chat, and like then you could also run your own server, and there was like federation. And then very quickly, like all of the users were like 99% of the users were using Facebook Chat or using Google Talk. And like at some point they just decided like, hey, we're just going to not support this protocol anymore. We're just going to turn it off. And then because they had all the users, like the protocol became useless. So you could still use it, but there's like, 1,000 people on it now. So like the same thing could happen in BNS. We could get an app that comes out that gets like 1 billion users, like, and they say, hey, like, we like this BNS like V1 is really nice, but we want to like point it at something else. So I mean, what we need to do is, as an ecosystem, we need to have a lot of different apps, which is sort of how DNS works today. It would be very hard for even governments today. I mean, you look at competing like China and the US, like they still use the same system because there's so much network effect that like they wouldn't be able to just like say like, oh, we're just going to make our own. Instead, they block certain things, right? But they don't like unilaterally say we're just going to make our own China DNS system or US DNS system. So once you get like a really big network effect, it becomes hard to change.
I think I do want to add one thing, Dan, if I can respond also to what you said, because you said if we get like 99% of the people to use it, that's a different story. I do think that given the state of the Stacks ecosystem, that there needs to be public outreach and stuff needs to be done. So if we would be talking about the Stacks node, sure, there's a SIP process for that, and it's a long process, but it's very rigorous, right? I don't exactly know, honestly, how that would work, what that would look like for the Hero API. So as Dan says, almost everybody uses the Hero API. So can they unilaterally decide to just switch to BNS2? Should there be a non-consensus SIP process involved, that they write a small SIP and say, hey guys, this is what we want to do? Is that the right place for it? I don't really know. I'm just asking that rhetorically. And you could have that rift be created, right? Because yes, Hero is the most popular one that's being used, but it's not the only one. I know that some other larger projects in Stacks also run their own nodes. So are they going to also switch over? And if they don't, then you get a really interesting situation, because you talk to one node and you get a name that comes from BNS1. You talk to another node, you get a name that comes from BNS2. So there definitely needs to be coordination and outreach in this respect, because there are these APIs that are very well used. So you could say like, well, we get the network effect and we use, but in the meantime, you get a very chaotic moment where people might send tokens to the wrong address because these name systems no longer coincide.
And I
Huddle
think
all the forks.
I think that part of it leads to, like, my main complaint with your example there, Larry, about like Google Talk and Jabber and all that other stuff. That was great. Google, though, decided they were going to have their own silo of names. And so they registered, whatever, Dan Trevino at Gmail, Larry at Gmail, Marvin at Gmail, whatever. And their Jabber names were resolved within their own system. They were never concerned with interoperability with other applications, right? And if that's what we want to encourage,
you could totally interoperate with it. There was a time
you could at the beginning, but that was not what they were concerned about. They were concerned about getting people on Jabber. And when they decided to take their system to another chat thing, they just moved everybody within their little silo. If that's what we want to encourage with BNS, I think we've already lost, because we don't want my Boom to go and resolve a bunch of names within Boom and then have a completely different app that resolves names within their little app. We want these things to work across the network. And so it's not, I think, feasible to just say, well, anybody can take their names and go do whatever they want, because I think we're trying to get interoperability across the entire blockchain, I think.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. It's just that this is a inevitable part of just how human systems work, right? Like, there's nothing if everybody in the world goes over, if we have BNS and no one uses it and everybody goes over there because somebody made something cooler, I have no way to. The only way I can solve that is by creating it's something that exists in people's minds, right? They have to know what so, for example, they put up my post about Jabber. Why did this fail? Why did this fail when Google and Facebook used it? Because Google and Facebook, as Dan pointed out, they were trying to sell, the brand they put in front of users was Google Talk or Facebook Chat. They didn't talk about the protocol. And so users had no idea what the protocol was. They didn't care. So it was super easy. For example, WhatsApp, which is super popular, that was XMPP as well too, right? Users have no idea. I don't know what it is today, but as an implementation detail. And so it becomes very easy to remove that from users. And so a counterexample of that is email. Users have a concept of what email should be. So they're email is a thing that I have, and to use email, I need to pick a company. So I pick Gmail, or I pick Hotmail, or I pick iCloud. And so these two things exist in people's minds, and that is what keeps email as a separate thing. If 99% of people use Gmail and then they didn't know that email was a separate thing from Gmail, and then that would give Google the power to basically disconnect from Hotmail and from Outlook and from Microsoft. But we've gotten almost to that point. There's a very interesting article by James Lop about this, where there's basically email is now 3 or 4 big companies, and if you're not one of those 3 or 4 big companies, you can't actually send an email and have it be received. So we're close to that in email, but that's sort of a counterexample. So how do we do this in Bitcoin? In Bitcoin, we have these ideas what is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is something that has only 21 million coins. It's something that has a certain set of rules. And because people believe that, that's the fact that people believe that is what keeps it separate. And so with BNS, we need to create a culture, or we need to have a set of expectations as to what is the canonical BNS. BNS is this contract or that contract or has some certain properties. If people have no idea what it is, then yeah, you're right. When there's not a lot of users, it's quite easy to have this problem you're talking about. I don't have a way to solve it. If you do, please let me know.
Wow, that's all very interesting. And, you know, you guys obviously have a lot more of a background understanding from what I do, from how all of that stuff works and what the analogies, how the analogies actually play out. It makes sense to me, but I'm going back to, I have a V1 name. I'm going to have a V2 name. So I'll have both. If no one is actually using V1, I guess it doesn't matter for the consumer at that point because I have both. But if I'm using my V1 name for some stuff and whatever, because I'm using apps that are resolving there, and I have the other one, now I have two that I have to balance, maintaining, renewing my registrations, making sure I don't lose them, and my identity is now fractured. So I'm almost like I'm actually schizophrenic in my wallet. I'm two different people. So that's not functional, right? That doesn't, in that case, that's not functional. So we got to figure out, there's got to be a way to fix that. Either it's got to be standardized and everyone's using V2. That'll protect the end user in some way. But it does limit people that might want to build out on V1, or we got to do a way where they're combined, where they're recognized together, they're linked and they're co-registered or something.
I see that confusion, and this might also have to do with just the way these products were named. So we're talking about BNS V1 and BNS V2. So it really sounds like this new BNS that's being built by the Trust Machines team is the successor to BNS 1. But it's not really the case. BNS 1 is a contract that was launched together with Stacks 2, and it will remain where it is. So I think a better way to look at this is to really say, like, these are competitors, call them name system A and B. And that's really what you're dealing with here. So to give you an example, in normal DNS names, to make that a bit easier, you can buy a .com, right? I can have Marvin.com. And that's the only thing I could care about. But let's say if I want to buy a .eu or something like that, that's a completely separate entity, a separate name, right? I might not care about .eu. I might only care about .com, and that's where I'm gonna stay. So seeing BNS 1 and 2 as competitors and have the best one kind of come on top of that, I think it makes that easy to understand. It's just the names of it. That still doesn't take away from the fact that you as a user, in the end, you want to own your name. You want to do that, right? And be able to transact safely with your friends and whoever you're transacting with. So I think picking one name and then only caring about that name still makes sense. It's just something you would do. So I have a .com. I don't care about a .eu, for example. So that's just what I'm going to use. But
again, you're
comes on top.
You're now saying the users can just do whatever they want, which is great, but now developers have no reliable way of using a name system between the two and getting the right answer.
Exactly. So that was the point that I was just going to get to as well, right? So if I have a .com and .eu, these names are obviously different. I have Marvin.eu, Marvin.com. But in these name systems, what you see here is that there's going to be overlap in these namespaces. So I can have a .btc in one and a .btc in BNS V2. And I think a lot of the confusion comes from there. So naturally, this is up to Trust Machines how they will handle this. And the way they are handling this is saying, like, look, we could be adversarial. We could just launch BNS V2 and launch it in a blank slate. So all the names are unregistered. You can buy any name, right? So I have Marvin.btc on V1. Marvin.btc on V2 could be picked up by someone else. They're not doing that. They're saying, look, we're going to do a name drop system. They have figured it out. And they say, you automatically get the same names. Right, so they're playing nice with BNS V1. They don't have to do that. But then beyond that, these names do have overlap. So that is the choice. That is how they decided to do it, right? Another way they could have done it is say, like, look, we're not going to copy any of the namespaces of V1. So .id only exists on V1. On V2, we're going to launch a different namespace that doesn't exist. Now there's no overlap, right? That could have been a different approach. So
that would have made it
another
harder
way to look at this.
Right.
That would have made it harder to get people to adopt to you don't want to do that to the community, right? That was the right way to do it. That's why they did it that way. They didn't have
I mean,
to,
it was a way. It was a way to do it. If you so for example, like Hank and Jeff with BNSX, they took a different approach, which was they said we're gonna like BNSX was also a competitor to what we're calling BNSV1, right? It was like another smart contract, and it operated by like you transferred ownership of your current name to their contract, I believe. And then like they had a resolver, and then like it had a similar API, but like that sort of failed because like they didn't do the outreach, right? They didn't get people on board like to use it. And then people were, I mean, we still see today, people were like, how come I can't renew my name? It's well, because you don't own your name. Like this BNSX contract owns your name. So you have to move it back. Like it's very complicated, and they didn't do the work to, I mean, like politically, it didn't catch on. Like, just people didn't, like, I don't know. Like, some people use it, people trading it. But like, anyway, my point was that like they're all competitors. They're always. It's not considered competitors. They're options for people. And so another way to look at these though is imagine like say like Marvin makes a new namespace, right? Like let's call it like I don't know. Like let's look at BNSX, right? Or BNS, or we're calling BNSV2. Like you could really think that like so when they have the date where they're like going to copy all of the names that are currently on the current contract, and they're going to register them on what is BNSV2. Like at that moment, you can think of it. There's really two names exist. So I have like Larry.BTC like on BNS1, and I also have Larry.BTC on BNS2. So you could look at this as one name, or you could look at it as actually like these two different contracts are different namespaces. So it's really Larry.BTC.BNSV1 and then Larry.BTC.BNSV2. Like they both, like each contract is in itself a namespace, right?
Right. And this is decentralization, right? It's the space we're in. You know, that's how it is. It's not adversarial, but it is competitive. But I think
it's just how names work in humanity, right? Like my name is Larry, but you may know a Larry, right? And so
I
in
know
like
Larry's, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
so like I'm the in the Stacks namespace, maybe I'm Larry, but like in your mind, but like in your family namespace, maybe someone else is Larry.
Yeah,
Right.
names are always contextual in that sense. Like
Yes.
Right, but which Larry am I
we're
sending
talking
my
about.
stacks to? You know, I need to know which Larry I'm sending my stacks to when I'm sending Larry stacks.
Yes, this is correct. Send them to all the Larrys. They all deserve stacks. Send them all
Or I
your
can
stacks.
send them I can send them to HeroGamer.
HeroGamer
Oh,
wants them.
Hero needs them.
Hero
Hero
game,
wants them
right?
too. He's more deserving.
So we actually have a few questions from the chat over here. A couple of them from Jamie Fletcher. Jamie's been doing some cool stuff in the space with us. One question is, do owners get some kind of a notification when their names are due for renewal? And I guess actually, do V2 names renew on the same kind of schedule? It's a 5-year registration or whatever it is. And is there any kind of notification when it's up for renewal? How does that work?
No, they don't get notifications since everything lives on the smart contract, unless someone spins up a front end and you log into them and sign into notifications and they provide that service, then yeah. But directly from native, no, you don't get a notification. And sorry, what was the other question? The renewals, do they work the same way? Yes, everything on the namespaces will be transferred over exactly as it is. For new namespaces, they may set up their own rules and make renewal periods or their lifetime be shorter or longer or whatever, or maybe don't have a lifetime and they never expire. But everything will, from BNSV1 to V2, will be working as it is right now. Everything will be migrated as it is. The length of the lifetime of the names, your renewal period, everything will be exactly the same.
Okay, so at least there's some consistency there. And it sounds like, as far as you said, that they're there could potentially be some kind of a notification service people might be able to subscribe to if somebody were to create that kind of thing that could monitor contracts like that for people and let them know when dates are up or something.
I feel it won't be a big ask for Leather to do that since they're going to be supporting V2. I could definitely ask the Leather team to build that in because that does seem like a useful feature for users. Now that renewals are actually gonna take place.
I think it's worth adding a little bit of color there as well, since earlier you were talking about like, oh, you have this .btc name, you want to write on Seigel, and then the namespace is not the name is not set up right, and the zone file doesn't work. To me, I think like a user shouldn't even have to be concerned about these things. It should just work. So what this shows is that also a lot of the end user facing products are still very lacking. So BNS, part of it is a developer facing system, a developer facing tool, and then we just need to have good apps that make good use of that. So the same as like no notifications to me is of course crazy that we don't have it, but someone needs to build it and it needs to be there. So is that necessarily up to them? By them I mean Trust Machines building a name system, and maybe or maybe not, but this, without getting too deep into this, why Seigel didn't work, right? We have seen tooling that worked for a while and then has failed. I don't know if you guys have heard of Gaia. This is a storage network that was used like in Stacks 1 and 2 era. They would store a profile on there that was connected to your name, and then some of these apps would expect that to exist, and then if it doesn't exist, they say, hey, your name is invalid, right? And all these experiences go back to that. So I think even beyond when BNS2 launches, there's still a lot of work to be done to get these user-facing products to really make good use of that and add these things, right? Like, hey, your name is coming up for renewal, you should renew it, and give you a one-click a button to do that.
Okay, so I think that actually, so for the Seigel app or Seigel app or Sigil app or Sigil app, and everyone's talking about how you pronounce it, I'm not sure exactly what it is. I've been told Sigil.
We're good at names.
Well, to be honest with you, that's from a marketing perspective. We just said their name like 5 times now, so it's good for them, actually. But I think that's actually the issue. I follow the directions and I go through, and it populates a Gaia address in my zone file. But you're saying that that's actually not a thing anymore, so they just don't recognize. They recognize it as not being set up properly because that address doesn't actually go anywhere.
Well, in this specific case, I can only speculate, but I'm just trying to highlight like how this evolution has gone, and that these tools were being built and used and then kind of left behind, and apps upgraded, but not completely. And I don't blame BNS for this, but I just blame the surrounding tooling and then the end user products. That
I can give some background because I built some of those tools, and then like I don't work at Hero anymore. So like basically the ecosystem. Like the way the Stacks ecosystem like developed, it was originally focused on names, but like it became apparent that like the massive growth opportunities were not in names, right? So then it built a layer 2 and smart contracts, and then like DeFi has been like the major thing that's been driving the Stacks ecosystem. So like there's a lot of money in that, right? And so that's where the developer resources have been focused. So that's just like, so ultimately like we need to have apps that somehow make money on it, that can like, where it's in their financial best interest to like maintain these tools. And that's the way things will go forward. Just to like, I see a question from Jamie here. It says, personally, don't think users want copycat identity, guys. I think that's totally true. I think that what we can do is is to try to create a community, like developer community, like between different apps, like Leather, Xverse, like etc. All these different apps that are using BNS, and try to get like get sort of consensus on like what it is, and then you won't have that like copycat problem if like all of the apps sort of have consensus on what BNS is and like the path forward. Like this is that we're all going to like focus on a new contract, etc. And I think that like that was sort of why I tried to get like a working group going together in the first place, was to get consensus on what needed to happen. Like, because I would hear from like Ken from Xverse that says like, BNS has this problem, like how come no one's working on it? And then like that problem, or my users want to be able to send Bitcoin to BNS addresses. So I wrote up a spec for him, which I don't think they implemented, but then like Leather went and implemented my spec. So there's just like a lot of like, it's really like, there's the technology, but then there's also like a social layer, which is like getting people whose apps use this technology to like participate, and then also to sort of like agree, like, you know, provide their feedback of what they need, and then like it gets executed, and then they sort of like, oh, this is what we want, like we will continue to use this new version. Like that's like a political process that needs to happen.
Right.
And that ultimately that political process is which will, ultimately that consensus is what will give you a lack of a standardization and a lack of copycat identities.
Very, and it all makes sense, right? I mean, we're just in a weird place because we're still very early, and it's something that's building out, and there's apps that built on it before it was maybe complete to the next manifestation. And you know, like you said, there's got to be someone that builds it. It's all stuff that's got to be built, and there's got to be an incentive for somebody to build it one way or over another. But eventually to get the users more adoption, which I think, did I hear correctly, is about 300,000 BNS names right now. So there's many of those probably are not the same, like individual users, but even if it's like the average people have 4, that's still like 70,000, 80,000 people that are using .btc names. It's a handful. We need to grow that by a significant margin, and the only way to do that is to make it easier for people. So a lot of information.
I mean, easier is, yeah, for sure. Another way to do it is to make it valuable, right? Because we've seen that like people will do very complicated things if they can make money.
Well, isn't that kind of what BNSX really went after, though? They tried to make it profitable by people locking up multiple BNS names. That was basically their main draw, right? You could register multiple names that way. Am I wrong?
I think they were trying to trade it, but I guess you could say that, yeah.
Well, I'm sure there was other stuff to it. You know, I'm not as familiar with it as you are, but that's just from a general standing back look. That seemed to be the draw for most people trying to use it, was that they could register multiple names.
Yeah, my general point though is that like you can make it as easy as you want, but like if there's not like use cases that people want to really use it for, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
That's really my point. And so maybe that's making money. Maybe that needs to be providing some utility, whether it's money or something like that's useful in their life.
Right. It's got to be usable and useful. Right. So it's got to work, and people got to want to use it. Which I do think that there's plenty of potential use cases for it, and it seems like we're heading in the right direction. It's just like, you know, building in the space is slow because there's a lot of moving parts. It is decentralized. I'm gonna let I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I can do this all day. The next thing I have is at noon, so I'm sure you guys don't want to be sitting here for the next 2 hours talking about this. But I really appreciate everyone's time. All of you guys are amazing. I don't know if Haddy actually was able to. I'm not sure where he's gone. I know he was so excited about. I'm sure he had a lot of questions.
Maybe I'll show up again.
So
I do want to say I see one more question from Jamie about the BNS v2 airdrop that would probably be valuable to answer by Jesus or someone else.
What is the question? I can't see. Okay. If I do not claim my V2 from the airdrop straight away, could someone else buy my name? There's no claiming, like it's just airdrop to you. Which, by the way, that was something that, like, as developers, we did not want to do because this was significantly harder. But yeah, we wanted to make it so that no one has to claim or do anything. The V2 is just going to show up in their wallet.
And that's actually, I mean, that's ease of use. That's how it should be for the end user, because you can't expect it. You're gonna get more adoption that way, right? Because everyone has one. It makes it easier for the developers to use because everyone that was on V1 is on V2. So that makes that makes a ton of sense, doing it that way.
So if I can ask one clarifying question on that. So you're saying that as a user, if I have Marvin.btc, then at some point in time, I just see Marvin.btc appear in my wallet for BNS v2, right? And then after that, it's fair game. So both of these names could expire independently. And then if my wallet uses BNS v2, I will only see the BNS v2 name. So as an end user experience, then I see my name, Marvin.btc, then sometime at midnight, this switch happens, and then in the morning I see Marvin.btc, but now it's a v2 name. Is that how I understand it?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I think that's not entirely true, right? Because you could have a wallet that like decides not to support BNS v2, right? But because BNS v2 are like standard NFTs, it would still show up in that wallet, right? The NFT would show up if it supports.
NFTs. Yes.
Well, I mean, because like the current name is not an NFT, it doesn't support the standard. So wallets have done like they have a separate code path for BNS, like to show BNS because it's not a standard. It was like BNS exists prior to the standard. So one of the things that's in BNS v2 is making name standard NFTs. So you could have a situation where the wallet like still shows you BNS v1 and says like, hey, we're just not going to support this BNS v2, but because they support standard NFTs, you'll still see BNS v2.
Yes.
Yes. I put a thing in the chat. I think we should also talk a little bit about the proposal that Marvin shared a couple weeks ago. If people want to, if not, we can.
100%. Absolutely. Let's hear. Yeah. What was the proposal?
BNS.
Do you want to get a brief overview, Marvin, or do you want to
sure. Yeah. If I'm happy to discuss it. I still have 15 minutes in any case. So as Larry said, there can be many different name systems, right? So this is a name system concept I should highlight. So it's nowhere near the same state as Trust Machine's BNS v2, which is already a rugged build-out system that has been audited and checked, right? So this is a concept, but it generated a bit of interest, which I think that's why we can discuss it. I see everybody's getting very excited right now, and yeah, I guess we can discuss it as in names, like where name systems could go, because this is one iteration of that. So this concept was shared recently. So half of the people, I see all these animations going on right now. People are going crazy with them. Shared with a few people, and Larry was quite taken with it as well. So that's why this came up. So this name system, which we called CNS, for whatever reason, working title, is a name system that is the same as what BNS is, but a key difference is that, BNS v2, so we can have multiple names, right? A big departure from BNS v1, but a key difference is that this uses a recursive naming system. So that means that, I should say recursive NFT system. So in BNS v2, names are NFTs. So Marvin.btc is a NFT that I can trade on a marketplace. I can go to Gamma, I can trade it. Now, BNS v1, and even before that, we used to have subdomains as well. So call them subnames. These were not very popular. We can speculate as to why. I think part of the reason was that it was just hard to use. It was just cumbersome. So this support has been dropped, has gone away. But what this recursive NFT system does is it reintroduces subdomains. So, for example, I can register, talk about Ryder, right? I'm with Ryder, so I can register a namespace called Ryder, and I can register a name, community.ryder. But now I want to give everybody who owns a Ryder a name in that namespace. So Larry gets a Ryder, he wants larry.community.ryder. That's what this naming system would account for by allowing you to create a NFT for that subdomain, which is then also an NFT which can be traded. So that's where the recursive nature of it comes in. So you get these multiple layers of having multiple names, and they will inherit the properties of the higher name. And that is put together as a concept that that makes this possible. So each individual name is an NFT, but they also form a chain based on that structure.
That sounds like a good solution to me. I guess it depends on. So if someone was to build out that solution and they were to adopt V2, then that would probably be the standardization that everyone would follow, I would imagine, right? If you built it recursive off of the V2 BNS names and allowed subdomains that way, and then my .btc I could register it with Ryder, or I know we can do it with .locker and all that stuff too, but it could be a subdomain off of that V1 BNS name, right? Do I understand correctly what you're saying?
So I would say that goes back to the same question of like how would this as a option or competitor be launched? You could be adversarial and say we're going to launch this and we're going to ignore everything that predated it, which leads to these conflicts, right? So .btc is re-registered. I can grab Larry.btc. And now you have a weird situation. Another way could be like, no, we're going to launch this with these existing namespaces blocked so that there can be no name overlap. And then you're going to do what you want, or you find some hybrid solution where you either port in names, you airdrop them, or you build a system that is interoperable with the previous name system, which is also something that can be accounted for. So BNS v2 is a lot more flexible in how names are managed, whereas in BNS 1, that was not the case. So I would also assume that that's why when BNS v2 was built, they decided to do this snapshot and an airdrop, right? Because in the beginning you asked like, oh, if I register on v2, do I already get a v1 name as well? The answer is no, not because BNS v2, they don't want to do it, but because BNS v1 is not flexible enough to allow for that, unless you want to spend the money twice, I guess. So with BNS v2, I would say there's a lot more flexibility in which you can have interoperability between name systems.
Yeah, it's a very complicated situation, right? Like I said, there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm not sure I quite understand the whole thing of it. But I do get. So there could even be a way where when you're registering with V2, that there's an option that they provide where it also offers to register you a V1 name. Not that they're necessarily going to do that, but it could be, but you'd be paying the fee twice to do that. And there would have to be a reason why you would want to have a name on both. So people have to be using. So we really just have to see where the market goes, right? Where the market of developers develop.
Exactly. But just to then illustrate the counterexample with, so BNS v2 introduces a manager capability, and I could let Zapato or Jesus talk about exactly what that means, but it's a significant improvement. And this would theoretically also allow, let's say 5 years down the line, there's a BNS v3 coming out. The way I understand how BNS v2 works today is there can totally be a system where you say like, well, now we can actually replicate names, and this manager can allow for that without having to re-register or pay the fee twice or do something like that, or allow a synchronization or something like that to occur. So, and that's made possible because they have this concept of managers, which in BNS v1 doesn't exist, but I will let them speak to the specifics. This is just how I understand it.
Sure.
But does name resolution happen for those subdomains in this manager namespace thing? How are those subdomains that they, in a manager contract surfaced to the API?
Okay. Yeah, Dan, we talked about this, you and I, like literally 2 or 3 days ago. So we're still doing like research into what the subdomain solution is going to be. And I'm looking through the API you sent to find out what we need from that to take over. The most likely solution is that we do it in the zone files as was previously done. And we just either fork or clean up whatever is in that formatting repo you sent over. But if not, there is, again, the cool thing about the managed namespaces, but you and I talked about the downsides to this, is it's too expensive. But one of the benefits to the managed namespaces is if you did register that Boom wallet, would be you can then set up subdomains or NFTs within that managed namespace as well, kind of similar to replicating the design, like an early version of the design that Marvin is proposing. But like you're saying, the problem with that is, yeah, you had to pay enough to register .boom, which is really expensive. So for now, what we're leaning towards is the first solution, as you mentioned, because like it's just more useful for people who don't have that much funds, is to keep the subdomains basically as the same, like with the same process of mainly being through the zone files. And I'm not sure if we have enough time, but Pato is working on a front end to like help piece that together. So we actually are at the moment.
That would be awesome. I do then question, like, I think you said the max zone file length is 4,096 bytes, right?
It's either 4,096 on chain or an IPFS CID, which in there you would be able to register.
Gotcha. Oh, that's right. You did mention that before too. It was off the top of your head, but yeah.
Yeah, no. Again, your feedback was really, really helpful in figuring out how exactly we should do subdomains and why. And yeah, like it hit me when you said, well, I can't afford, like, even registering .boom to do it through the managed namespaces would be extremely expensive. And yeah, you're right about that.
I'm curious if anyone knows the history of why we carried the prices of those namespaces over to a smart contract. Like, they made sense on Bitcoin maybe, but why do we carry those high prices over to? I don't know if anybody has the answer. I'm just curious.
I mean, it's really easy to understand. If they were cheap, they would be all gone. So, like,
I do think,
like,
though, and I don't know how that is handled in BNSV2, but in my concept, I ran into that same issue. Like, okay, you have a root namespace manager. Those namespaces, the philosophy that they're not owned by anyone still prevails there, because I like that idea. But they can be prohibitively expensive to register, right? They burned 44 Bitcoins to register .id back then. So if today it would still cost 44 Bitcoins, then it starts growing out of reach of everyone. So in my concept, I allowed for a mechanism to vote for a new pricing model that does not require a consensus upgrade. So to put that in plain English, is that everybody that has a namespace and bought one before are also eligible to vote on a new pricing mechanism to either make it cheaper or more expensive. And they could then respond to market conditions and say, well, Stacks has gone up so much that a namespace, let's say .ryder used to cost $10,000 is now $100,000. So how about we as a community, the community being all the namespace users, come together and we can vote on a new pricing model to adjust that, in a way that makes sense. And I think that is important. So in the concept is just a concept, again, not vetted, not audited, not looked at by any tokenomics person, right? So we don't know if that makes sense. But the idea of not requiring a consensus upgrade, right, which is writing a SIP saying like, hey, we want to change these parameters because it's too expensive. And in BNSV1, this is also something that is lacking for most namespaces, in that these prices can never be updated. And for a namespace itself, I'm not exactly sure how that would go. And I'm curious, Jesus, how do you guys deal with that in V2? Can namespace registration prices be changed? What kind of mechanism exists? Or did you actively choose not to allow that? And then why is that the case?
I think Pato might be able to answer this, but we kept pricing exactly the same.
Yeah, we kept pricing exactly the same as it was in BNSV1.
And I guess it's a dumb question, Marvin, but I agree with you in general. But I guess my question from like just like a behavioral, like from a behavioral perspective, would be, who wouldn't vote to decrease the prices?
Well, I think you'd find a consensus there. That these prices are the right prices. That were like a handful of developers who said like, oh, let's peg it at this many stacks, right? So maybe that made sense back then, but not now. So I do believe that consensus can be found. Like how expensive would it be?
Competition.
Right?
So there are ways to solve this. You can look at other names like HNS Handshake. They did a Dutch auction or something for namespaces. There are lots of creative ways to figure out figure out pricing. I know we're running short on time. The reason I wanted to like share this concept because I think it's important for us to think of where we are now in BNSV2 and where do we want to go. And the main problem we have is not the features in BNSV2. It's the fact that we're not getting a lot of useful apps built on this. And not even just that they're apps, but like business models, like where people can make money off of it. And so when I saw Marvin's concept, I thought, hey, like maybe I would be willing to burn 40 Bitcoin to register a namespace if I could collect all the registration fees for the namespace, or if I could sell even more names in it. And that's the example is like, if you think about the current web, you can buy Microsoft.com, but Microsoft can't sell you like Larry.Microsoft.com. They can do it through their own like way, but it's not canonical. Like there's no thing in the DNS system that like protects your right to that, right? There's no like set of rules. So I think that if we can enable, like there's the potential that if we can enable like more assets that can be sold underneath top level names, those names will become more valuable. Like for Dan's product, right? He could sell them, he could auction them, he could do whatever, he'd get the revenue, and it would be in a way where like when you do a lookup on the name, you get the result of the name. And it's not like what we have now where subdomains as they were in DNSV1 are a totally different thing than looking up a name in a smart contract. So anyway, I wanted to start like we operate in a marketplace of ideas. So I think it's important to start getting these ideas out there and like maybe people don't like them, or maybe eventually people say, hey, this is where we should go after BNSV 2.0. Maybe we can try a namespace.
Oh shit.
Yeah. I think this has been great.
Yeah, I'll hop to the Nakamoto one, but thank you for everything, everyone.
Yeah, Nakamoto Town Hall is on starting at 10:30, and I thank you guys all. We could have this conversation another time too. Like we can definitely do this more often.
Definitely.
I'm so glad. Great meeting you all.
Sure.
Some of you guys I've known. Some of you guys, this is my first time meeting you. This has been a great conversation. I love it. I really think we need more of this in the space, and you guys have all been extremely knowledgeable, and I think the conversation has gone well. Thank you all. Thank you all. Anyone have any last words before we sign off?
I wanted to thank everyone again for making the time. Thank you, everyone.
Really. Thank you guys. I know you're all busy. Take care. I'm PeaceLoveMusic. This has been great on The Organized. Jump over to the Nakamoto Town Hall in Twitter space, and then we'll see you guys at noon for the Organized space. And thank you guys. I appreciate you. You all have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.